Wow, that video did way better than I ever expected it would. Thank you to everyone who watched it. At the end of that video, I said I would talk about another one of my favorite games in the series, and that game is Sonic Unleashed. Sonic Unleashed released on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 in 2008. In 2008, I didn't have a 7th gen console, so I didn't get to play this game when it first came out. Even when I got a PS3 in 2010 or somewhere around there, it would be a while until I got around to playing it. But when I finally played Sonic Unleashed, I loved it and it became one of my favorites. And in this video, I want to see if Sonic Unleashed is still just as good as I remember it being. Sonic Unleashed starts with an amazing CGI cutscene. A part of me still wishes the Sonic movies looked like this instead of live action. Anyway, Eggman is clearly up to something, so Sonic is here to stop him. He even turns into Super Sonic in this opening scene. After destroying all of Eggman's ships and cornering him, Eggman pleads for Sonic to let him go, and promises to turn over a new leaf. Obviously he's lying, and Sonic ends up getting captured. Couldn't see that coming. The machine rips the Chaos Emeralds out of Sonic and shoots a laser into Earth, shattering it into 7 pieces. This also awakens Dark Gaia.
Yes! It's just as the Gaia manuscripts foretold! The entity that was sealed within the planet has awakened!
The energy from Dark Gaia also turns Sonic into the Werehog. Eggman then says he did this so he can use Dark Gaia's power to make Eggman Land. It's been how many games now and he's still trying to make Eggman Land? Well, unlike Adventure, we actually get to see Eggman Land, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. Sonic gets launched down into Earth where he lands by this dog-like creature with wings, who now has amnesia. Sonic decides to help this creature get his memories back, as well as calling him Chip because he likes ice cream. After a few levels, they save Tails, who tells them that he knows a professor that probably knows what's going on and how to fix it. So they fly to Spagonia to talk to him, and that doesn't look right. But of course it can't be that easy. Eggman kidnapped the professor, so Sonic, Tails, and Chip have to go to Missouri to save him. After they do, Professor Pickle, yes that's his name, tells them that they have to go to each of the 7 continents and go to each Gaia temple to restore the power of the Chaos Emeralds. In my Frontiers video, I said something like Frontiers retcon Sonic Unleashed out of canon, or something like that. I thought this because the temples have clearly been here for a long time, so when Frontiers said that the Ancients used the Chaos Emeralds as power sources, I just didn't think that made a lot of sense because of the temples in Unleashed. But a comment I got on the video said we can probably assume the Ancients used the Chaos Emeralds as a power source years before Dark Gaia was a thing on Earth. That does make the most sense. I think Sega needs to release an official Sonic timeline. But anyway, that's pretty much it for the story until the end of the game. Sonic and Chip go to each continent and restore the power of all the emeralds. Compared to the previous Sonic games, Unleashed's story is very simple. It's just a world adventure. And I don't mind this at all. I don't need multiple endings or 3 to 6 campaigns that all connect to each other. All I really want in a Sonic story is a fun adventure where I get to see my favorite characters interacting with one another. And Sonic Unleashed does that. Well, kinda. The only returning characters in this game are Sonic, Tails, Eggman, and Amy. Oh yeah, Amy's in this game. Amy doesn't really do much in the plot. The only scene she's in that kinda matters is when she doesn't recognize Sonic when he's in the Werehog form, and it clearly hurts him that not even his biggest fan can recognize him. The only other thing I remember about Amy in Unleashed is the optional dialogue towards the end of the game. Amy asks Sonic if he wants to go out, and you can respond yes or no. And believe it or not, there's actually a canon answer to this. In the next game, Sonic and the Black Knight, when Sonic is teleported to the storybook world, he falls with 2 chili dogs. And at the end of the game, when he's brought back into the normal world, Amy is mad because she thinks he forgot about their date. I missed when Sonic games had some continuity between games. Thankfully, Sega is trying to connect everything again. There is one aspect of Unleashed's story that I'm not a fan of, and it's Tails. Tails is my favorite Sonic character, and I always hate when games give him a stupid arc. That goes against what his character was in the classic games, and especially the adventure games. I think most fans can agree Forces is Tails at his worst. But Tails as a character hasn't been good since, I would say, Unleashed. He doesn't really do much in the plot other than fly them places, and he needs to be rescued from a few Dark Gaia creatures. I liked Tails' character and colors. I thought Tails being kinda sarcastic, because he knows he's smarter than everyone else, was pretty funny. It helped that they didn't go overboard with this, so Tails still feels like Sonic's friend and not a jerk. Maybe I should have talked about the story of Sonic Colors. Whatever, I just wish Tails did more in Unleashed. At least Frontiers is trying to fix Tails as a character. While I'm not a fan of how Tails is portrayed in this game, I think Sonic is portrayed really well in this game. He's not as energetic as he is in the adventure games and Heroes, but he still wants to help people, and he's excited to go on an adventure. So I would say he still acts like I would expect Sonic to act, even if he's more laid back than he was before. He still has a few lines that I can imagine Adventure Sonic saying. I know a lot of people think Chip is annoying, and I can't really blame them. Chip is the comic relief character. These types of characters can be super annoying if they're not written well or are overused. But in my opinion, I don't think Chip is that annoying. And I always thought the writers knew he was sort of annoying because of the few times where Sonic was clearly annoyed. Sonic Unleashed reinvented Sonic in 3D by taking what worked in the Sonic Rush series on DS and bringing it to the third dimension. If you never played Sonic Rush, Rush is where the boost style of gameplay came from. The boost gameplay would be used in every mainline Sonic game after Unleashed, except for Lost World. Unlike the Sonic games that came before Unleashed that focused more on momentum-based platforming most of the time, Unleashed is more about blasting through the levels as fast as possible, and being able to react quick enough to dodge obstacles. A lot of people prefer the adventure style from the earlier 3D Sonic games, because it resembles the 2D game's mechanics more than the boost formula. And I agree, but my favorite thing to do in a classic Sonic game is to blast through it as fast as possible. So I don't mind the change to the boost formula that much, but I understand why people would prefer the adventure style. If the next game after Frontiers includes more physics and momentum-based platforming, and challenges, we might have a game that satisfies fans of both gameplay styles. But other than the lack of rolling physics in Unleashed, I think there's still enough similarities to the old games so it's not totally different. The levels in Unleashed have tons of alternate paths and shortcuts. Some of them I didn't even know about until this playthrough. For example, in the level Dragon Road, I usually just go on top of the roof here, but while replaying the level to get the S rank, I found out you can just run across the water here, and on the other side is a rocket that Sonic can ride to get to the next section of the level. And I'm not sure if the developers intended this to be possible, but if you have enough boost you can just run across the water and skip a large section of the level in Jungle Joyride. The only problem I have with some of the alternate routes is how hidden some of them are. The worst example I can think of is the one in Arid Sands. I don't think I found this on my own. I'm pretty sure I looked up a guide when I was trying to get all the S ranks. These levels also have a decent amount of platforming in them. There are usually a few spots in each level where you have to slow down and do some platforming. But these are probably the worst parts of these levels, because Sonic doesn't control that well when moving at slow speeds. While I can get through these sections without any problems, I've played this game a lot and have gotten used to how Sonic controls. But a lot of first-time players have a lot of trouble during these sections because of the controls. Sonic controls more like a car than a person. Well, he's a hedgehog, but you know what I mean. Sonic can't make sharp turns like he could in the adventure games. So there's speed and platforming, but what about exploration? Unleashed does this as well. There are a bunch of collectibles in these levels like tapes and records, but those just unlock concept art, music, and let you rewatch cutscenes. The only mandatory collectibles are the Sun and Moon medals. These are not like the Chaos Emeralds from the 2D games, where getting those give you a better ending and Super Sonic. In Unleashed, the medals unlock more levels. You can't progress the story if you don't get enough medals. This is a part of the game that the fan base is very divided on. Some say it's good because it encourages players to explore the levels and find the medals. Some say it's bad because the boost formula is not made for slow exploration. I get where both sides are coming from, but I personally like exploring for the medals. But remember, I've played this game so much that I remember where most are, and I'm used to the controls, so collecting them isn't a big deal for me. I like trying to collect as many medals as I can, and also trying to get the S rank in the stage. But I've heard stories of people who were playing Unleashed for the first time. They would try to go to the next level but not have enough medals to continue, so they would have to backtrack and replay some old levels, then come back. I think the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed handles the medals much better. After you beat a stage, you're ranked on how fast you finish the level. The higher your rank is, the more medals you get. If the medals worked like this in the HD Sonic Unleashed, I think most people would be okay with them being in the game. The only aspect of the day stages I don't like is how you don't start with all of Sonic's moves. You unlock them as you go through the game. This isn't a big deal, I would just prefer if you started with them all like in Sonic Generations. But overall, the daytime stages are great. While there are a few issues, like the controls not being the greatest, and for some, the Sun and Moon medals, I would still say the daytime stages are some of my favorite levels in the whole series. When the sun goes down, Sonic turns into the Werehog. These levels are a big reason why a lot of people don't like this game. Instead of speed and fast reflexes, the Werehog stages are all about combat. If you've ever played the classic God of War games, then you know what type of gameplay the Werehog levels have. A lot of people who don't like the Werehog will say it's because they don't play Sonic for this type of gameplay, and that's fair. I think the alternate gameplay styles, or gimmicks, in Sonic games are best when they're still similar to the main gameplay style. As long as the alternate gameplay style has a decent amount of platforming, exploration, and speed, I usually don't mind them being in the game. It's why I'm okay with treasure hunting levels in the adventure games or classic Sonic and Generations, and why I'm not okay with Big's fishing in Adventure. I like the Werehog levels, but they are definitely my least favorite part of the game. The Werehog is much slower than normal Sonic, so instead of trying to avoid obstacles with fast reflexes, we have more traditional platforming challenges like jumping from platform to platform, puzzle solving, swinging from poles, and climbing from poles, by using the Werehog's stretchy arms that he has for some reason. I don't know if it's ever explained in the game. I guess it's just a power he got from the Dark Gaia energy. While the platforming and puzzles are simple, I think they can be a lot of fun. especially by the end when they get a bit harder. The only problem I have with the platforming is the Werehog doesn't have a drop shadow. Well, this can cause a few deaths. Looking at the footage of the final level reminded me that the combat doesn't get much harder by the end of the game. In the beginning of the game, the combat is easy, and by the end, it's just as easy. Again, I've played this game a lot, so maybe I think it's easy because of that. But I remember thinking the Werehog levels were easy even during my first playthrough. This game is meant for kids, so I'm not expecting Devil May Cry or Bayonetta levels of difficulty or depth, but I wish it was just a bit harder. I know a game having a combat system with a lot of depth doesn't necessarily mean the game is fun. Devil May Cry 5 isn't fun because of how complex the combat system is. It's fun because beating up enemies and doing combos is satisfying to do. For an example of a game's combat that is fun but isn't very complex, let's look at Spider-Man PS4. Spider-Man's combat isn't on the same level of DMC when it comes to complexity, but it's still fun due to the combat being satisfying to do. The animations and sound effects also help. Back to Unleashed. The game has quite a bit of special moves and combos to learn, but you don't really have to use them because you can just button mash your way through most enemies. I know you can kind of button mash your way through most of the enemies in DMC as well, but the ranking system in DMC is a lot stricter, so button mashing will most likely not get you a high rank. Getting S ranks as the Werehog isn't that hard. You can just spam these finisher moves on every enemy until you have enough points, then just button mash your way through the rest of the enemies. I think the later Werehog levels are a bit better, because by that point you've probably leveled up enough to have a bunch of new moves. So while getting a high rank isn't satisfying, chaining the Werehog's moves together and doing combos is. But like I said, you have to level up to get a bunch of those moves. When defeating enemies, they drop experience points. You can use these experience points to level up certain things, like the Werehog's strength, health, how many shields you can use, or you can learn new combos. You can also level up normal Sonic, but the only things you can level up are his speed and boost gauge. I usually put most of my experience points into strength and combos, so I can do more damage to enemies. Because you're going to want to get through these enemies as quickly as possible. Not because the enemies are hard to beat or anything, but because of how long these levels take to finish. The length of these levels never bothered me, but for a lot of people, these levels are too long, and they prefer the way the Wii version of this game handles these levels. Instead of one 15-minute stage, they are split up into a few 6 to 7-minute stages. The only level I think takes too long in the HD version is Shamar Night. This was the only level, not counting Eggman Land, that took me over 20 minutes to complete. I didn't mean the Werehog portion of this video to get so negative. Like I said, I like the Werehog levels, but compared to other action games I've played, I don't think the Werehog is as good as them. But learning all the moves and doing combos can be pretty fun, and the boss fights are pretty good. The only part of the bosses I don't like is the QuickTime events. Actually, that goes for both gameplay styles. Both gameplay styles have QTEs in them. I know QuickTime events were in a bunch of games during this time, but I've never liked them. You know how earlier I said the Werehog levels were my least favorite part of this game? I want to backtrack on that statement, because these are my least favorite parts of this game. The only thing you do in these levels is press the buttons you see on screen. That's it. Thankfully there are only 2 of them. These levels aren't very hard or anything, they're just really boring. But hey, at least when you're done in these levels you can hang out in the hub worlds before the next level. I know when some Sonic fans hear hub worlds, they think of the hub worlds in 06, which were way bigger than they needed to be. You probably also think of Adventure's hub worlds, which were pretty good for the most part. The hub worlds in Unleashed are easily my favorite ones in the series. It doesn't take too long to get from one side to the other, so it never gets annoying. There are also a bunch of side missions you can do in these hub worlds, but most of them are talk to people, give things to people, or defeat a certain amount of enemies. There's also the hot dog missions. There are 3 types of hot dog missions. The first type of level is a time trial, and the second requires you to collect a certain amount of rings by the end of the stage, and the last type of level requires you to defeat a certain amount of enemies. I only played these challenges once so I can get the trophies. So overall, the hub worlds are fine. They have some extra content if the player wants to do it. But one of my favorite parts of the hub worlds, or really the whole game, is the art style and music. Sonic Unleashed moved away from the more realistic art style that the previous 3D games had, except for Heroes. Unleashed has a more cartoony art style. I've heard some people compare it to Pixar. I think the art style in Unleashed helps this game's graphics hold up to this day, for the most part. There are some really blurry textures and backgrounds, and I always thought the background in Missouri Day looked kinda bad. When I was younger, I remember seeing footage of 06 for the first time, and seeing realistic humans next to the more cartoony Sonic characters, and thinking it looked kinda strange. Unleashed has human characters too, but because this game isn't going for a realistic look, these characters fit in the Sonic universe. This is the only game in the series where I don't think the humans stick out. I guess the low-poly anime humans in Adventure 1 don't stick out. The last thing I want to talk about before talking about the end of the game is the music. Sonic Unleashed easily has my favorite OST in the series. The soundtrack has upbeat and energetic music for the day stages. The Werehog stages also have great music, and even though you can barely listen to it because of the battle theme, but seriously, if you stop to listen to them, they're really good. The ending of Sonic Unleashed is really good. After Sonic and Chip restore the 6th Emerald, Chip's memories come back. Turns out Chip is actually like Gaia, and he's supposed to protect the world from Dark Gaia. But when Eggman broke apart the planet, they were awakened earlier than they were supposed to be. That's why Dark Gaia was split and why Chip lost his memory. After all that is explained, they go to Eggman Land, which is known to be one of the hardest final levels in the series. They go to Eggman Land because that is where the final temple is. In this level, you swap between normal Sonic and the Werehog. This level has the hardest challenges for both gameplay styles. I actually have a lot of fun trying to do a perfect run of this level, and trying to get to S rank, although during this playthrough I missed the S rank. There are only a few things I don't like about this level. Not having a drop shadow during the Werehog sections, but I already mentioned that, and the frame rate. For this playthrough, I played Sonic Unleashed on the Xbox 360. I don't currently own a Series X, but I wish I did, because if you play Sonic Unleashed on that, it bumps the frame rate up to 60 FPS and removes most, if not all, the slowdown. But on 360, the game has a lot of slowdown. Atabat Day and Eggman Land have it the worst. With how bad the slowdown can be in Eggman Land, it makes parts of this level even harder than they already were. But that's pretty much it for things I don't like about this level. I know some don't like how long this level takes to finish, but that never really bothered me. After Eggman Land, we get our final boss fight as the Werehog. It's also the last fight against Eggman in this game. Yeah, this is another game where Eggman isn't the final boss. I never had a problem with Eggman not being the final boss, but I know some people do, so I thought I should at least mention it. The fight itself is really good. It might be my favorite boss fight for the Werehog. Eggman has a bunch of different attacks, and Mike Pollock does a good job at making Eggman sound serious during this fight. After another CGI cutscene plays, where the Dark Gaia energy is taken from Sonic, Eggman gets hit away by Dark Gaia, and Chip uses all the temples to turn them into the Gaia Colossus. We're at the final boss fight. This fight is separated into two phases. In the first phase, you control the Gaia Colossus. All you have to do is get close to Dark Gaia and then do some Q2Es. Then you play as Sonic and you have to make it to Dark Gaia before the time runs out. Do that 2 more times and then it's on to the next phase. A lot of people seem to have a lot of mixed opinions about this fight. Some love it and some don't. I'm kind of in the middle. One criticism I've heard about this fight is the controls aren't the greatest. I get where they're coming from. There is no other part of this game that controls like this, and the fight doesn't give you much time to get used to them. The other part of this fight that some people don't like is how it ends with a bunch of QTEs. I already said earlier in this video I'm not a huge fan of QuickTime events, so I'm not a fan of how this boss fight ends either. The thing that saves this boss fight for me is the music. That might sound stupid, but seriously, the music here is incredible. Sonic defeats Dark Gaia by blasting right through it, and Chip and Dark Gaia are sealed back into the Earth, and that's pretty much it for Sonic Unleashed. Sonic Unleashed is still one of my favorite Sonic games. There are a few issues I have with this game, but overall Sonic Unleashed is a great game, and because of Unleashed, we got the best received 3D Sonic game since the early 2000s. I was going to put Sonic Frontiers on screen too, but the score dropped since the last time I checked, which was a week or so after it released. Anyway, thanks for watching.